One of the biggest lessons that I've learned is you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. Just make sure you invite smart people into the room in which you can continue to grow and learn from.
Welcome to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I'm your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team. My hope is to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Leading a school district comes with real pressure, and even the most capable superintendents can find themselves caught in traps that derail their visions for change. And so today in this episode, we're going to dig into some of those pitfalls and what they mean for young leaders stepping into roles where they're expected to drive large structural shifts across the system, big or small system. And so our guest today knows this terrain from every angle, Dr. Emilio Castro. He brings 24 years of public education experience, having served as a bilingual teacher, assistant principal, area superintendent, deputy superintendent, and superintendent. And so we're excited to hear his insights. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Castro.
Thank you, Larissa. Great being with you today.
Well, I'm so excited to dive in. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what was your first leadership role? And did you have any kind of misconceptions about going into that role? And anything you can kind of maybe look back on and laugh about now?
Yeah, absolutely. My first leadership role was an assistant principal at a large high school in Dallas ISD. Looking back, I believe that leadership, at that time, Larissa, I believe that leadership meant really having all the answers, working harder than everyone else, and then trying to solve as many problems as I could by myself, because that meant I was adding value and working hard for the organization and the people I served. And then I believe that would, I would be viewed as an effective leader. Very laughable, because over time it became very clear that as the more you do as a leader and the more you do for people, the more dependency is created. And that's the opposite of what you want in great organizations. What great organizations need is to build leadership capacity and density. One of the biggest lessons that I've learned in that initial leadership role is you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. Just make sure you invite smart people into the room in which you can continue to grow and learn from. It's about asking really the best questions, the best guiding questions. It's about developing others and then building systems so that people succeed whether you're there or not. Once the systems and processes are built and then those are supported, folks are trained and empowered and encouraged, that you get to greatness. And that's really directly connected to one of the obsessions from Patrick Lencioni, the first 4 obsessions of extraordinary CEOs. He talks about maintaining and building strong, cohesive leadership teams. And that only comes about when you learn to trust others. Certainly when you invite healthy conflict. You can't be afraid of people disagreeing. You have invite disagreements and then have discourse and dialogue about the best decisions that need to be made together as a team. When organizations can accomplish these things, you become much stronger as a team. So yeah, early on, I learned those valuable lessons. It's not just about you working hard and having that work ethic. It's about working through and with people to ensure their capacity and their density in leadership is developed. Greater decisions are made at the point of impact.
It's always interesting when you look back on some of the misconceptions you have as a maybe younger person stepping into the role of a leader. And so I love hearing your just insight of just how it isn't about being the smartest person in the room and having all the answers. I always think the best leaders say something like, I don't know, but let's find out together. And learning some of those answers together can carry you a lot further in building that relationship and trust you have with those that are under your leadership as well. So I one of the things that the reason that you were on our radar is that you gave a presentation about some pitfalls of leaders. And I really wanted to talk about some of those. And so you discussed the traps that can kind of derail superintendents. Would you share just a little bit about some of those traps and what it looks like in practice to avoid them?
Absolutely. And that's one of the big reasons that understanding yourself and the traps that we all have a propensity to fall into, regardless of experience. Most leadership traps, particularly involving executive leaders like superintendents, come around clarity traps. Leaders are often consumed about urgency, about getting things done quickly. There's things that have to be addressed. And I get that. But that cannot come at the cost of unintentionally neglecting the fundamental structures that make organizations successful. And these traps that will prohibit that include choosing popularity over accountability. Now, we're all human. When leaders, particularly superintendents, choose popularity over accountability, system organizations' goals and metrics aren't met because you're more concerned about being liked, about being agreed with. And then you also have a propensity to have followers that think like you, behave like you, either intentionally or unintentionally, just to be in your good graces. So never choose popularity over accountability. You have to hold everyone accountable for the success, the goal, and metrics of the organization. But most importantly, yourself, holding yourself accountable for what your role is in the organization. As a leader, the second trap that folks fall into is choosing certainty over clarity. That means having all the data you need to make the best decision. You'll never have all the data. People often refer to this as analysis paralysis, where they don't make a decision until they feel like they have all the pertinent information. Look, be clear about the goal. This is the goal. Here's the direction. Here's how we'll achieve it. Here's our metrics. You don't have to have every answer, every question, every potential situation that could arise. Just be clear about the direction, the goal, and the metrics to achieve success. Another big trap that people fall into is when you fall into a system of urgency or firefighting, and you're trying to solve today's emergencies while ignoring tomorrow's systems. And I believe it was Albert Einstein who stipulated that the majority of our problems today are a result of yesterday's solutions. So when you've dealt with an emergency, you have to have an after action review, and you have to analyze your systems and your processes that are in place. 99% of our issues are about our systems and not having strong systems that are relentlessly insisted upon. This is how we do things here. This is our culture of high performance. So when you're solving an emergency, you have to get to what Fairman and McLean wrote a book called Enhancing Leadership Effectiveness, where they refer to this topic, and it's called problem-solving adequacy. And problem-solving adequacy alludes to this. When you solve a problem, does it stay solved? And if you're dealing with the same problem and over again, you solved an emergency today, but you didn't put in place or refortify a systems and process within the organization. And the last one I want to briefly mention is allowing departments to operate in silos. This causes some of the biggest headaches and problems in misalignments in organizations. Departments have to be part of the communication chain. They need to know the goals, the metrics, and they need to know their specific responsibility in achieving that. So their roles and responsibilities in every single major organization has to be clear. Very few school districts, very few systems, particularly complex systems that have multiple departments, do this well, and we don't achieve optimal success for students because our departments are working in isolation. And these frameworks, just to briefly summarize, build a cohesive leadership team and invite difficult conversations. You don't have to always be right, but the best decision has to be achieved. The organization has to have very strong clarity. I think it was Mike Schmoker that said, if you do nothing else as a leader, be clear. Everyone should understand what success looks like, what are the priorities, and then how the decisions are made. Communication has to be clear, overly communicated. You have to continue to repeat until it's ad nauseum for your team. That provides not only clarity, but sets the expectation for our behaviors. And then the final piece that I'll mention with this, Larissa, is reinforcing clarity through all your system processes, including hiring, evaluation, recognition, in your meetings, your accountability systems. All of that has to reinforce with clarity what the system goals are, what the priority goals are, and how we're achieving those and how we're measuring it. When those things are done consistently and over communicated, you create a culture of high performance with sustained systems for excellence.
Yeah. All of that. I just want to echo, mic drop. There we go. All the leadership wisdom. Because, so many of our listeners are MTSS leaders, or they're district leaders or building leaders, people who are future district leaders, right? Are listening to this podcast. And so we talk a lot about bringing your system together and how important it is to have a strong working system behind the backs of teachers, right? To support them in the work that they do in the classroom. And I loved what you just said about how, oftentimes we can get distracted or derailed because of urgency and forgetting to reinforce those systems or to build a system to even just say of this emergency is happening. What happens next time it happens? Do we have a system that supports those that are addressing this? And those are so important. I also loved what you said about not letting things happen in silos. We talk about that so much on the podcast, that you want to bring everyone together to because we all want to go in the same direction, right? We all want to support students. We all want to help students achieve their goals and make sure that they're successful. And so that it's often, I feel like the work is slowed down when everyone's not aware of what everyone else is doing, and you're working in separate systems and you're not talking to each other. So all of that is so key. So I'm so glad that you addressed that, because I also believe that as a former teacher in a middle school classroom, there are moments that I felt the breakdown of the system, right? When those things weren't happening, you could feel that as a teacher. And it really didn't help the morale of things. And I just think that that's the work of those district leaders, to help build and support the system. That's why they're at the viewpoint that they're at, is to make sure that work is happening so that teachers don't have to worry about that. They can do the work of supporting students. Well, I also want to talk a little bit about some of the strategies and habits that young leaders, so like I mentioned, there could be future district superintendents listening to this podcast. That's what I hope for all of you, if that's your goal. What are some strategies or habits that they could adopt now to avoid some of these traps that you mentioned earlier?
Absolutely. So one of the big things about traps is they're related to your habits, right? And habits, you've heard the phrase, they can become our destiny. And certainly ensuring that your habits are those that formulate the structures and actions that are going to lead to your desired goal. One habit that transformed my leadership role and thinking is, when something occurred, my initial reaction was, who made the mistake? I've since shifted and matured in my thinking to ask, this is my first question: what system allowed this mistake to happen? And that moves it away from the individual, and it puts more responsibility on me, because I've got to create systems and processes that ensure that excellence happens. But when you move to the system, that shifts your thinking. Young leaders really need to think about developing habits that support creating processes and systems for excellence, in staying firm on insisting that happens. How do you accomplish this? Schedule regular reflections. 1 a.m. and 1 p.m. for me, I, in the evening, reflect on the day and review my notes, and then create my action plans for tomorrow. Regular reflection is about, do we have a system that needs to be tightened? Do we have individuals that need to be retrained or reminded? Insisting that we're going to follow our systems and our processes for excellence. But you have to build in regular reflection time as a leader. One that's very, very difficult for particular young leaders is seeking feedback. Having people tell you the truth. The most powerful feedback is frequent, early enough where you can do something about it, evidence-based, dialogue-oriented, it's a communication, beneficial, action-oriented, clear, and kind. And Larissa, one of the things, if you'll notice about those words I just said, those are all letters in the word feedback. Frequent, early enough so you can do something about it, evidence-based, dialogue-oriented, beneficial, action-oriented, clear, and kind. And when you seek feedback, having that sort of scheme in your mind with those items really helps you seek very clear feedback that will be actionable, reflective, and ensures that the system gets stronger. Insecure leaders often don't seek feedback. Dan Phillips wrote a book called Lincoln on Leadership, in which the very first chapter, which highlights Lincoln's biggest leadership qualities, one of them is, he said, he often took public opinion baths and reflected on how he could become a better leader. Very powerful piece of seeking feedback. Sometimes insecurity leads us to not allow that. Make the expectations that we set for people measurable. Without making those measurables, it's a lost effort. Let me share a real quick a story on expectations. I was a high school principal. This is a super poignant story and personal to me. We were doing fairly well, but we weren't growing student achievement as quickly as I'd hoped. I was walking down my ninth grade hallway. On one side was a ninth grade teacher, and I asked her, "What is your definition of high expectations?" And she said, "Well, I expect all my kids to go to college. So if they don't turn in their assignments on time, they get a 0 because they're not going to get another chance in college." I said, "Okay, thank you." Literally walked across the hallway, asked another ninth grade teacher, "What is your definition of high expectations?" And she said, "Well, if my student doesn't do their best work, I conference with him or her. I have them redo the assignment. Still not there, I meet with the parent and the child. I encourage strategies. I give them things they can do. And I'm going to keep pressing until they give me their best work. I won't let them give up on themselves." And I was sitting in the middle of that hallway, Larissa, and I'm thinking, my goodness, both teachers were correct. I would want my kid in the second teacher's classroom, but both were correct because I, as a leader, had not very clearly defined high expectations. They were making up their own mind of what it looked like for them. So making expectations clear and then ensuring that everyone has the measure to that is huge. And then another couple pieces, communicate more often than you think necessary. Over communicate the expectation, over communicate the goals, and then how you get there, and then how it's measured. And then focus on developing leaders, not accumulating followers. That's a trap that a lot of young people fall into, is they want people to follow. I'm the boss. We're aligned if you do what I tell you. Well, you need to build capacity and density, and the leadership decisions will be more robust. A 2-3 day warning signs to make sure to look for as a young leader, but to said, hey, listen, you're falling into some traps that are going to set back the organization. One, or is there a bottleneck of decisions? Like, does everything have to come to you? If that's the case, you're not building leadership capacity and density. You're not trusting your people. You're not empowering. If they have to wait to get permission from you before exercising their good judgment, you've created a system problem. Is your calendar full of reactive meetings, or you're constantly having to go back and fix problems even though you had a system in place? Well, the system's not being followed. It's not being over communicated. It's not being insisted upon. And then finally, if you're surprised by problems, that's a big flag. There should be no big problems that are arising to you. 30-second anecdote. There was a situation where there was a parent that came to the board and spoke about a situation that her child was going through. It had some legal implications, some special ed implications, etc. It was not on my radar. As the board meeting concluded, my board president asked me, "Did you know about that?" I said, "No, and that's a problem, and that's mine to correct." He put me on the spot, and he asked me, "Well, how are you going to correct that?" Well, right off the bat, I have to ensure that my team knows the highs. When I say high, if the situation is high impact, high emotion, high interest, high dollar, or potential crime, put it on my radar. If it fits multiple of those things, put it on my radar very quickly. And so I put a process and system in place so it became very clear, because I don't need to know about every small thing. But if it hits one of those high pieces that's likely going to elevate, I need to be aware of it and how our system's addressing.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a leader often say, anything that's going to get us on the news, I need to know about.
Yes.
that was always our measure of this is important. I want to go back to you. You keep using this word density. I want you to kind of tell me more about that as a leader. What does it mean to create density?
Absolutely. So creating leadership capacity and density is essentially this is a metric of a great leader, a strong leader. And whatever you set that metric to be, that's what you're going to strive for. For example, high student achievement and performance, high quality instruction in every classroom, every class period, every day, community and parent partnerships, right? So if we're speaking specifically for school, you have at least 5 different metrics by which your principals are going to be able to say, okay, this is a highly effective leader. Could be different for superintendents. You obviously have finance, student outcomes, facilities, etc. So regardless of the goal, are these responsibilities being met at a very high level, and are good decisions being made? And do people have to continue to elevate and ask permission or questions to others on the chain of command? So when people understand the problem, they can resolve the problem and ensure the problem solving adequacy exists so that the problem is no longer recurring. Then we've built density and capacity. I've often told the folks I've had an opportunity to lead is, listen, when your team can do your job better than you, you're ready for your promotion. And Larissa, folks sometimes get a little better than me. They're like, are you trying to replace me? So I often give them a little analogy. If you see my fist, this represents all my talents, skills, knowledge, and abilities. I'm going to share those with you through word, through action, through meetings, through modeling. I'm going to give you my very best. Then this fist represents your very best in talents and skills and abilities. When you combine those two, you're not as good as me. You're better. And when you're better than me, you're ready for your promotion. I'm ready for my promotion because the leadership capacity and density in the system has welled up.
Well, and it's about building a team that is capable of doing the work without a lot of oversight or a lot of hands-on from you, but also that you can kind of work alongside to continue to grow and get better and empowering their team. I always feel like when a leader is empowering me to make decisions, it enables me to not have to depend on them more, that I have a strong sense of making good decisions. I can do that without them present all the time, but I lean on them for support or for backing when I need to make bigger decisions, or I can go to them to ask for help when I need it. I would love for you to talk a little bit, because I know that you mentioned you worked in Dallas. I know that you work in Houston ISD. You work in these big districts. These are big districts. What do you think are unique challenges for superintendents and district leaders of these larger districts? What are the things that they're facing when they're implementing kind of something at the larger scale in, different structural changes? We talk a lot about like the MTSS framework is a big, larger kind of infrastructure change, especially today in our climate. What kind of unique challenges are they facing? And maybe you could give us some examples. I'm loving the anecdotes.
Thank you. So from my perspective, and I've worked in Dallas ISD, San Antonio ISD, and now Houston ISD, the biggest challenges from my perspective, particularly in larger districts, is resistance to change. Resistance really generally comes from uncertainty. I have found that people don't necessarily fear change nearly as much as fearing not understanding where the organization's going. So when the more complex the change needed, the more sort of feedback and stakeholder awareness and input is critical. So that the pushback can come from students, it can come back from administrators, teachers, parents, community members, elected officials, politicians, etc. And when whatever is being supported, the goals are being implemented, not understanding where it's going and why it's going, creates the biggest challenge that I've seen consistently, is that it's resistance to moving the organization forward. And so large districts are incredibly complex, right? They're human resources, finance, transportation, SPED, facilities, technology, child nutrition, safety, academics. I can keep going on. All these different departments operate functionally to support schools in the goal. And as one department moves without the others, you feel the impact. And I'll give you a really quick example. We had a situation at a campus where we had a couple of very challenging things all occur at the same time. There was a situation in the neighborhood. It wasn't at the schoolhouse, but police were involved, and it was a firefight, a shootout. At the same time, the power went out in the building, and so then communication became difficult. It was via a cell phone. But because everyone in our district, every department is on the same thread and communication chain, we were able to have multiple police squad cars arrive on the campus very quickly without anyone reaching out to child nutrition. They deliver bottled waters immediately to the campus because campuses can get really warm in Houston very, very quickly. The safety and security team notified all interested parties that's hey, the schoolhouse is without power. It was actually a neighborhood impact. But because we've created cross communication systems where all critical stakeholders are in the loop, no one has to tell you do this or do that. When you're asking them to do something and they don't know why, there's going to be resistance in the school system and with outside of the school system. So one of the biggest lessons I've learned in organizational change is success will happen with when leaders spend more time aligning the system than actually building the initiative itself. Once the system's aligned and the communication is clear and the goal is clear, a success is much more evident, much more clear, and more expedient, rather.
Yeah. Well, and I think in a situation like that, it's you don't want to have to tell people what to do. You want them to know how to react. I believe, like in a larger district, because I've worked in a smaller district and a bigger district, it's a bigger wheel to turn. So when we talk about structure to change, like it just takes a lot longer and a lot more effort to push that wheel forward than it does in a smaller district. And so you have to kind of bring everybody along, and they have to understand the why. That you have to spend a lot more time on that. You have to orient it of like, here's where we're going. So I think all of that insight is so helpful, because I think any district leader or leaders that are listening, it's important to understand just, the kind of work that will be required to move things forward, and how important it is to have alignment as you do that, so that no one's left out of the loop when you're making these kind of changes.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I would love to talk a little bit about just looking back at your own experiences. Is there a piece of advice or lesson that you wished you learned early in your career as a leader?
Yes. Probably one of the biggest ones that I wish I would have learned much earlier is, especially as a new leader, right? But it still exists with some leaders who have experiences. Leadership's not about proving yourself so much as it's about improving the organization. And those are two very different things. And in order to improve the organization and not have that insecurity and the naivety of trying to show, hey, I'm the leader, I'm the boss. It's really important to focus in a couple of areas, like listening before leading, in listening with humility. And you can learn so much from anyone, whether it's a custodian or an assistant superintendent. There's value added in listening with humility, communicating, Larissa, with simplicity. The more complex the task, the more important it is for people to have clarity on how to accomplish the task. And complexity in large organizations, erupt very quickly. But the more clear, concise, and simple the communication is, the expectations are more likely to be achieved. And then another big one is delegating the important, meaningful things to the right stakeholders. You've got to pick the right leaders for the most critical tasks, and you've got to delegate to the right people. And that just comes with knowing your people and knowing how much density and capacity you've built. Again, continue to make decisions even when you don't have all the perfect information. And then another one that really comes to mind, Larissa, that I wish I would have been much better as a young leader: coaching rather than directing or telling. Two very different pieces. And it was a sports an analogy that I had picked up years back. The greatest athletes they don't have one coach. They have multiple coaches to coach them in different aspects of their professional sporting thing. So coaching means showing, modeling, demonstrating, supporting, practicing with the person. That is very different from telling people what to do or directing their work. You will build trust, you'll build alignment, teamwork, and camaraderie when you coach more often than you direct. At some point, the people get so proficient, the coaching is more limited, and that builds the trust across departments and your key stakeholders as well.
I'm a firm believer in the coaching mindset will carry a team a lot further than just being directive on that, and I love that. That's a great insight. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing with us all these leadership tips. I mean, all of it, there's so much that you mentioned that I'm going to have a hard time pulling a clip, because I was like, all of this is so good, especially, going into a new school year and just sort of being inspired as leaders, because it's a tough job. I know being a leader in education, you have a lot of responsibility on your shoulders, and it's so important to reflect and think about those things that you're doing for your team. So I just appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and share your insights to our listeners.
Thank you so much for the invite and the opportunity to speak with you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn @Branching Minds.